What if the next medical breakthrough could change thousands of lives? Welcome to Moving Medicine Forward, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on the breakthroughs shaping the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Jeremy Schran, and together with CTI's leading experts, we explore the cutting edge of clinical research transforming patient care. Each episode, we dive into the science, strategy, and innovation driving medical advancements, joined by global therapeutic experts who are redefining how we understand and treat critical disease. From rare genetic conditions to revolutionary treatment protocols, we're not just discussing research, we're sharing the human stories that move medicine forward. Today, we're taking a look at the industry as a whole. Back for another update is Joel White, owner of Market Cap Consulting, LLC, a voice many of you know from his insights on market trends, pricing, and CRO performance. Joining us from the CTI side, Ryan Gifford has spent nearly 2 decades growing with CTI, from regulatory and project management to leading commercial teams and now helping build and scale our central lab. Together, we unpack what a recovering market actually looks like in 2026 and what's changing when it comes to funding, execution, and partnership models. If you're trying to make sense of where the industry is right now and what will matter most over the next 12 to 18 months, this is a great conversation to tune into. Welcome back to the podcast, Joel, and welcome to your first time on the podcast, Ryan. But you can give us a quick little reminder of who you are, Joel, and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So Joel White, Market Cap Consulting, which is a one-person operation, just me. I'm an individual consultant in the industry focused on finance and pricing, but I also cover general industry trends and do a bit of punditry, I guess you could say, on LinkedIn around it.
And Ryan, you are here with us at CTI, and you've been with CTI a really long time. So tell us about that.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I started at CTI back in 2006. I was working in the regulatory and scientific affairs group, helping write INDs and protocols, and some of those activities worked for a period of time in project management before moving to the commercial side of the organizations in BD Ops and helping to develop budgets and proposals. Moving from there into a sales role, and then eventually spending some time as we grew the European team, living in Germany, coming back, leading the North American sales team. And my most recent venture is helping build the new CTI Central Lab. We've been operational for about 4 years now at the lab.
Just need to note, Jeremy, you got 2 guys here who started in the industry in 2006 and budgets and proposals.
That's pretty
Did not
cool.
know that.
Yeah. 20 years, 40 years combined experience. Let's get into today's topic. What's going on in the industry? Joel, from the bird's eye vantage point, what word best describes the clinical research industry so far in 2026?
Recovering. If I can add a separate word, I would add rapidly.
So what are some trends you're tracking that may not be widely discussed yet?
Yeah, well, definitely the recovery in biotech funding. There's no doubt about it. When I was here with you in September, the month before, August, was one of the 2 worst months in recorded history for biotech funding. This was a particular source that went back to, I believe, 2017. Another one of those months had happened last year. By contrast, according to Baird, the first quarter of this year was a doubling from the first quarter of last year. Now, that's off not a great base. It couldn't get much worse than it was the first half of last year, but we are seeing a rapid rebound. We're seeing it both here in the U.S. and Europe, but especially in Asia Pacific as well, which hopefully we can get into later. But yeah, absolutely recovering rapidly. You can see it in the numbers. And yeah, definitely feeling good about this year, especially compared to last year.
It's good news for those of us in the industry, but also better news for those patients that are looking for these life-changing therapies and treatments. So to both of you, across sponsors, CROs, and sites, where are expectations most out of sync with the reality today?
You know, I think we could go back to the things that we frequently hear, where you've got aggressive FPIs, compressed enrollment, faster protocol amendments. I think at this point, we have to be past the post-COVID, right? Where we're talking about post-COVID, now it's 2026, right? Where's the industry going now? I think sponsors are always going to be motivated by speed, data, and cost. I think CROs are always going to be look at risk and operational delivery. But I think that the pressure is really at the sites, right? Where the patients are enrolled. How do we continue to improve our relationship with our sites, understand the patient journey throughout the process? And so the 2 individuals as the sponsors and the CROs continue to be motivated. And I think they're both performing pretty consistently over the past 5 or 10 years. I think the site environment has changed dramatically.
If this rebound in funding has legs and it continues to be a longer term trend, certainly one of the things I would look for is what are the issues with competing trials, starts to rear its head and start causing some issues. Sometimes when biotech funding and industry funding overall recovers at a rapid rate, sponsors can get into a rush to expand current trials rapidly. And so if you're talking about things that CROs, sites, and sponsors struggle with, it's rapid changes to existing studies. And so you can see if that's going to cause some issues. But otherwise, I'm viewing it as a tide that's lifting all boats.
What are you seeing in terms of biotech funding and capital as it becomes more selective?
I think on the commercial side, on the CRO side, what we're seeing is more milestone-driven expectations, whether these are incentive shortfall plans or bonus malus plans, just wanting additional desire to have more skin in the game to meet these deliverables. And so we're all competing. And I'd be curious, Joel, if you think those are good trends or if we should be approaching them cautiously. But I think the complexity of the agreements between CROs and sponsors are rapidly increasing. And I suspect that has to do with the expectations on the funding side.
Yeah, that is a long-term trend. I would call it a multi-decade trend I don't see it slowing down at all. In fact, you mentioned bonus malus. I'm starting to see and hear of those being tied to project staff remaining on the trial and not being moved to other trials. So lots of different creative ways to do it. I don't know if it's good or not, but it's here to stay, and CROs have to be responsive to that. But they have to be very cautious and careful about what they sign up to. And I don't know how much you want to get into the nitty gritty of it, but if you're going to sign up for some incentives that don't have a great chance of actually succeeding, that doesn't mean you don't sign up for them, but it means you need to buffer your pricing or other parts of your contracting to be able to afford to take the worst case scenario on that if you have to.
So when we're looking across trials that stay on track versus those that struggle, mentioning those milestone payments, what execution decisions tend to separate them from other trials?
I think one piece that I've seen is and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but where we're bidding trials much earlier. We're bidding trials a year and a half before the first patient first visit. Sometimes we're bidding trials where they don't have a schedule of assessments. I don't know how you're going to compare budgets when each CRO is making up their own schedule of assessments or looking at, in my current life, the biomarker strategy for each study well in advance of the first patient first visit. I think the most successful trials that I've seen have tremendous interaction with the investigators, with the sites, where you can almost pre-enroll your trial because you've got such a good connection to the community and the investigators, and they're helping you build your trial, build your biomarker strategy, understand a schedule of assessments that is executable. And then you go out and execute that plan that has already been invested with your ultimate customers. I think it makes for a much faster execution and a much more reasonable set of assumptions when you're thinking about what this is going to be, enrollment duration, screen failure rate, all of those components.
Yeah. Because a CRO developing a schedule of assessments, like that's not appropriate at the, really any phase of the trial. I mean, that's the sponsor's responsibility. And if you're the CRO and you're being asked to do that, you're basically being asked to give away, free consulting. And so, yeah, if it's a year and a half beforehand, it's clearly a funding exercise. You're clearly handing the sponsor back a ballpark. And then to your question, Jeremy, it's funding, the availability of funding for a particular sponsor has been a major factor over the past 3 years of whether a trial starts on time and can stay on track. And there have been countless examples discussed publicly by some of the larger publicly traded CROs of sponsors that say they have the funding, go to contract for a trial when they really only have the funding through FPI or maybe halfway through enrollment. They just have it in the back of their heads. Well, I've got this guy who says, they're going to deliver the rest of the funding, and then it doesn't come through. And then you have a CRO that has to fire its customer. So a lot of that pressure has finally started to loosen up a good bit, but a lot of the cancellations and delays that we saw at scale, especially in 2024 and the first half of last year, a lot of them were tied to the unavailability of funding, particularly on the biotech side.
Joel, I think that's a really good point. Jumping back to the previous question around the deployment of capital and how much more disciplined investors are in the types of programs and the tranches that they lay out for the customers. And I think there is a cautious optimism, and I hate to use that word because I think I used cautiously optimistic the last 2 years coming back from JP Morgan, and I think I can't continue to use it in year 3.
I don't. Yeah.
But there is a risk of cancellation just because of how funding is a bit more scrutinized in this new wave of this increased funding, this rising tide. But I think it's tied to additional milestones.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to your point earlier of having a good plan and having that close relationship with those sites and knowing that the trial is going to be filled quickly and having a better plan than just tell us what to do or we think this might work. So site readiness is discussed constantly. What does readiness look like when it comes to lab operations and specimen workflows? Specifically speaking to the lab side of things.
We've seen tremendous growing complexity of the biomarkers collected, of the number of esoteric labs searching for these labs or making relationships with labs. It might be one academic center that does a very esoteric test. They might do it very well, and we certainly don't want to recreate it or develop our own assay for it and using those. So when I think about handing that to a site, so with a laboratory, we deliver a kit with all of the tubes. Our job as a laboratory is to make it as simple as possible for the site to easily execute that protocol. Thinking through, did we label the tubes? Did we put all of the phlebotomy collections in one bag? Did we give them an extra Band-Aid or a tourniquet? Whatever they need to make it a one-stop shop for the site. And then thinking through how we handle those specimens on the return. Half of a laboratory is around logistics, right? So if we can send all of those tubes back to one of our global central labs, and then we will send those out to those esoteric labs. The chances of a site, they've got a lot of things going on. There's a number of patients. There's a lot of moving parts. If they have to send one specimen frozen to this lab in Tennessee, one specimen in ambient to this lab in Arkansas, it just increases the risk that you're going to have some complications, and it increases the site burden pretty substantially. If I think about that in Europe, typically they don't have dry ice at the site. And so now there's an additional coordination for frozen samples. I'm calling the dry ice vendor, making sure that that arrives the same time the patient completes enrollment. And all of that gets back to the various specialty labs within the stability window of that sample. Again, really thinking thoughtfully around how we can make that process easier, understanding the stability of every specimen, understanding if it could be shipped ambient or refrigerated or frozen so we have fewer shippers leaving the site. All of this are ways that the lab can meaningfully impact the site burden and hopefully your enrollment.
Yeah, I'm sitting here smiling, Jeremy, because there's can often be this misconception out there that CROs do not understand what it's like to help relieve site burdens, and they don't understand what sites face on a day-to-day basis. Well, I'm sitting here at CTI offices. CTI is one of a number of CROs that owns a site that sees real patients. And people think that CROs don't interact with patients. Plenty of them do every single day. Some larger CROs have not only own dozens of sites, but also operate numerous clinical research units as well. So, any discussion about CROs and site burdens can't always assume that CROs don't know what it's like to live a day in a site's shoes, because many CROs own their own sites. And this conversation has just reminded me of that. And in September, I had the pleasure of joining with you on a site visit to CTI's site, just about 20 minutes away from here in Cincinnati. So just always remind myself of that. It's a common myth that CROs don't understand what sites go through.
There's a tremendous advantage to being able to ping the site, to work with our site coordinators to say, how does our lab portal look compared to you're interacting with 5, 10 different lab portals, right? Is ours reflecting the expectations? Where is ours overperforming? Where is ours underperforming? And so to have that real candid feedback, again, invaluable as you grow a CRO, as you grow a laboratory, to have that site.
Speaking of those logistics, this kind of talks to that a little bit. With increased clarity around hybrid and decentralized trials, where are organizations still misjudging oversight and accountability?
I think from a lab perspective, on that, the growth of decentralized clinical trials is not going away. Whether it's home healthcare, on a laboratory perspective, I think that there's tremendous opportunity to think about how we can use local clinics. So instead of the patient having to go back into the academic site or whatever the recruitment site is for the clinical trial, particularly for rare disease patient populations that might live 100 or 200 miles away from the trial site, if they can go into their local little clinic, their local pharmacy, and then have their blood collected there, and then ship back to a central laboratory. There's some really interesting technology on capillary blood collection that can potentially be done from home. From a laboratory perspective, there's additional capillary blood. It's not the same as venous blood, and so we need to reevaluate our assays for that. But not surprisingly, given the amount of work that CTI does in rare disease, about 50% of our trials have some sort of decentralized component, whether that's home healthcare or some other avenue there. And so from integrating a laboratory perspective along with the clinical trial execution, I think it's an important thing that we continue to think about is how we continue to meet this decentralized pattern that's growing in the industry. And I think it relieves the patient burden. And as we continue to focus on how we incorporate the patient journey into our clinical trial execution, this is something that's not going away. We should continue to think about.
Yeah, it seems like the industry is over time figuring out a way which elements can fit into most trials in a cost-effective way and in a patient-centric way. Whereas I remember 6 years ago when I started seeing some of the first virtual site models, I thought, wow, this could really be the wave of the future. And I was in-house at a CRO at that time. And then I remember the first couple times I saw vendor quotes on how expensive it would be to run entire trials, through home healthcare, through completely virtual site models. I was blown away. And then I actually thought about it 2 seconds. I'm like, yeah, it's a hell of a lot more expensive to send a nurse out to a patient's home than it is to have a patient come to a centralized site. And so, yeah, there's elements of it that still persist to this day. And then there are some that, maybe e-consent and some other examples where it makes sense and you're seeing it throughout. But it's been interesting from my standpoint to see which kinds of decentralized elements have stayed the course and are on, throughout most trials today versus which elements just have proved to be vastly too expensive for the majority of trials.
Have you seen anything with regulatory environment that's affecting the pace of the industry activity?
Not right now. Back a couple years ago, especially with the new administration, and then even before that, the Inflation Reduction Act. There was a lot of concern that impacts on drug prices, disruptions at the FDA, things of that nature could drastically slow regulatory decision making, could affect industry funding, and there may have been a little bit of that, but it just feels like a lot of those things are in the rearview mirror at this point. You get outside the U.S., I hear and see different examples of different countries. I remember seeing something most recently about the UK trying to facilitate at least faster startup in trials. And it'll be a matter of time to see how that takes hold. But otherwise, it seems like major regulatory concerns that folks were having in 24 and 25, clearly where we are in the industry today, a lot of that's in the rearview mirror.
Where have you seen technology, including AI? AI is a big buzzword right now in every industry, but where has that improved the executions of the trials today? And where do you see it moving in the future?
Yeah, I don't know so much about where it's improving execution today, but in terms of examples of how I've been seeing CROs think through it, talk about it. Back in November, I got to interview 6 CRO CEOs at CNS Summit exactly about this topic. And most CROs are trying to figure out which parts of our technology stack do we continue to keep with third parties, which parts do we own and or develop in-house and maintain, and then which parts do we figure out some other solution for, or are there opportunities to completely automate things? CROs are trying to figure out their technology strategy moving forward, what they own, what they partner out, and what they don't need or may need for the first time.
Jumping back to a comment I made earlier about the increasing complexity of clinical trials that we're seeing, that's also resulting in a tremendous increase in the volume of data that we're collecting. And I think having some sort of systems that can say, how do we systematically or look at this volume of data? It's something that needs to happen. It's something that's going to happen in the industry as the amount of data continues to increase, how we think about how we synthesize that data. And then the cost of this data, right? And so we want to get more cranks on that wheel for every piece of data that we generate. One thing that I've seen AI impacting CTI is in our model-informed drug development group, where they can take all of the data from your preclinical work, from your clinical work, and start to think about how they can model that data and predict how future patient populations, how future dosing regimens, how future food effect might impact the enrollment of your clinical trial, with the idea of reducing the number of patients that you'll need eventually based off of leveraging this vast quantity of data that we continue to generate in our clinical trials.
Looking 12 to 18 months ahead, what will the industry leaders care much more about than they do today?
It might come down to how we think about our partners when we're, maybe dovetailing with the AI conversation. And again, reflecting the complexity of clinical trials, we're going to have increasing partners and all of us working together. I think if we change the vendor mindset to a partner mindset and a collaborative solution, I think that's the direction that we're going to go, because individuals are specialized and getting increasingly specialized in their individual technology and individual roles, whether it's patient recruitment or data synchronization. Having a cohesive solution, I think, is where the industry is going to go.
Yeah, I've got an interesting one that I've been thinking about, Jeremy. There is an absolute explosion of new trial activity from sponsors based in China right now. Absolute explosion. And a lot of those studies are being signed up now and throughout this year. And I think in 12 to 18 months, you're going to have a lot of US and European-based CROs struggling with their China-based sponsors over how to maintain trials, complete them, resolve different regulatory expectations. The new business is phenomenal, and I'm very happy that the industry is benefiting from it. And I think that's going to be a multi-year thing. I think in 12 to 18 months, there are going to be some significant cultural challenges as those studies mature and start to close out.
Joel, do you think we're going to see an increase in sites in China? Are those studies going to enroll both in Europe, North America, and have a site in China?
Yeah, I can't tell about the sites in China. And there are plenty of local China CROs, and they still seem to be in the driver's seat in running local China studies. And quite frankly, if I was a mid-size or large CRO, I don't think I'd want to run local China CRO studies. But the explosion of activity that many, especially mid-size and larger CROs, are benefiting from are the global trials that have to be run on the back of their very early phase activity. And even a lot of their early phase activity has to be run outside of China for, I assume, different demographic and other reasons.
So you might have insight into the funding as well. Are you seeing a shift in funding, and do you have visibility in how those Chinese biotechs are funded versus European and North American?
I don't. It's just the anecdotes that I've heard, both from earnings commentaries and the more easily publicly available stuff. But, the vast majority of the consulting work that I do is with CROs, and just some of the anecdotes from when these folks go out and visit trade shows, conferences, or just hit the circuit of Shanghai biotechs is absolutely unbelievable. And it's hard to parse out the exact data, but some of the super performance that we're seeing from some of the larger CROs is very heavily attributable to just this explosion of activity from China. It's not that it's never happened in the industry before. I can't put a year on it. I just know it's happened at least one time since you and I joined the industry in 2006. But this seems extra significant. I mentioned earlier, I participate in CNS Summit every year. It's usually every November in Boston. And the amount of activity is so significant in China that they are doing a special China conference this summer just because of that. And some of the stories I hear around that are just absolutely amazing. So any of my CRO BD peers out there, if you or your executives aren't spending much time in China, better get out there.
So what do you think that's going to do to the execution side of things, Ryan? Like you mentioned earlier about working really closely with the sites. What kind of challenges is that going to add to the execution when you move into a new region like China or the APAC region in general?
So I think there's two pieces of that. One is Chinese-funded biotech, right? Where the rules of negotiation, how we started this conversation, are probably going to be much different, right? As the contracts and the agreements, startup agreements, and the final contract with Bonus Malus plans have rapidly, in my view, rapidly evolved and maybe a little bit slower in the industry. But I think working with new entities and new investors are probably going to bring different challenges to that. Executing trials in China. So CTI has opened an office in Shanghai. We are fully in agreement that this is a very quickly growing region and one that we needed a presence in. On a laboratory perspective, it still presents some challenges because samples are not allowed to be exported out of China. And so not only do you need a site and boots on the ground in China, but you also need a qualified laboratory. And just harmonizing those laboratories inside China and outside of China will be something that the industry will have to grow to.
So to wrap things up, we're trying something new today. We haven't done this on the podcast yet. Ryan, you get to test it with us. We're going to do a lightning round. So I'm going to go fast, and you guys just quick, short answers to each of these things. One industry trend you think is overrated?
site burden.
Inviting 12 zeros to a 2-hour bid defense.
I'll take his, actually.
Awesome. One trend you think is underrated?
The explosion of Chinese biotech activity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
One metric each of you pay close attention to?
Can I give you one I don't pay attention to anymore, which is financially oriented. So the book to bill metric for CRO earnings performance.
One change you would make to reduce burden on sites?
I would look for opportunities to consolidate poor performing sites into larger networks or close them down.
I think PI paperwork, whatever we can do to reduce that burden.
One misconception you still regularly hear?
One that I just discussed with you 9 months ago, which is that CROs routinely and intentionally underbid projects.
One thing you think about for the future of the industry?
There's this very strange dynamic right now where it appears the number of drugs that are being reviewed for development is growing very rapidly. On the other hand, drug discovery service providers, at least those who are public, are struggling massively. You also, at the same time, have name brand players like NVIDIA, Amazon, etc., getting into the game. And you got to start putting a bit of a crystal ball to it. But there's a part of me that believes that there's a coming massive increase in the number of drugs to be developed. And that could be part of the funding rebound we're seeing. And it could be a very exciting long-term possibility for those of us who are service providers in this industry.
One last question before I let both of you go. With your combined 40 years of experience, what would you tell somebody, a young person who is interested in the career field of clinical research? What advice would you give them starting out?
Get in any way you can.
I think it's such a diverse field where we have new college graduates that have gone into facilities, into legal, into project management, into statistics. I would say find an opportunity to explore the diverse roles within the industry because it's not just one thing. It's a huge spectrum. Within the laboratory, we have a lot of individuals that work hands-on, right? It's like you're on your feet, you're moving your hands. There's a lot of remote work to be done. So it's hard to say that this is just one industry. There's a lot of little nuances and probably a spot for just about anyone.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Ryan, for joining me today. It was a pleasure to speak to both of you.
Thank you, too.
And thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you for the great conversation, Joel and Ryan. The industry may be recovering, but success is coming down to execution, stronger partnerships, and a real focus on reducing site burden and improving that patient experience. The industry looks bright for those who are ready to take on these challenges. And as always, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. Visit CTI Facts to learn more about how we can help you with your clinical trials. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep moving medicine forward.